All right. My name is Hossein Kazemi. I'm the director of CISDM, and welcome to 2023 CISDM celebration of Black-Merton-Scholes option pricing model that revolutionized finance, not only in academia, but more importantly in practice. The first half of this celebration took place about a month ago. Those of you who were here, of course, enjoyed it. If you missed it, the recording is available on YouTube. Just search for CISDM conference and you will see the video there as well. What I want to say just a few words about Professor Merton, who for the second time has accepted our invitation and is speaking to us. 4 years ago, he spoke at our conference in Boston. And actually there, he talked about practical applications of options in solving energy problems. So today he's going to talk, of course, about a different topic. I want to thank Mila and Sanjay, Associate Directors of the Center, for helping putting this together. And of course, I want to thank all of you for taking time to attend here. My colleague Mila is going to do the formal introduction, even though Professor Merton doesn't need an introduction. And Mila, please.
All right. Thank you very much. All right. Well, welcome. Thank you. So 50 years ago, in 1973, Robert Merton, Fisher Black, and Merton-Scholes developed the pioneering formula for valuation of stock options. The Black-Scholes-Merton model, which was since that has been called, it has been widely used mathematical method to calculate the theoretical value of an option contract using current stock prices, expected dividends, option stock price, expected interest rates, time to expiration, and expected volatility. The methodology that was developed by Bob Merton and his colleagues paved the way for economic valuations in many areas, inside as well as outside of financial economics, such as valuation of insurance contracts, guarantees, pension funds, we'll hear more about that today, and flexibility of physical investment projects. Their novel work has also generated new types of financial instruments and facilitated more efficient risk management in our society. For their work, Bob Merton and Merton-Scholes were awarded the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences by the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences. So I will just read you one line from the press release from the Academy. They said, the new method to determine the value of derivatives stands out among the foremost contributions to economic sciences over the last 25 years. Paul Samuelson, the first American to receive a Nobel Prize in economic sciences, once compared Robert Merton's influence on the finance to Isaac Newton's impact on physics. Put another way, he said, Professor Merton's work on life cycle finance, optimal intertemporal portfolio selection, capital asset and options pricing, to his more recent focus on helping to improve retirement systems around the globe has revolutionized the theory and practice of finance. So today we're actually very much excited to dive into Professor Merton's most recent work as we discuss his thoughts and on the challenges facing our global retirement security. We will kind of combine both theory and practice and address systems yet to exist, as well as those that might need improvement. So we'd love to hear about this. On a personal note, I also kind of wanted to share my connection to Bob Merton. When I was a graduate student at MIT, this is when I met him. My advisor and a good friend of Bob Merton, Andrew Lohr, he actually told me, Mila, if you really want to understand finance, go up the river. He was teaching at this time at Harvard Business School, and learn as much as you can from Professor Merton. And I was very happy to take those bi-weekly trips up the river. And that also led us to talk about more ideas, research, and we actually collaborated. And exactly 10 years ago, we published our joint work with co-authors, Andrew Lohr and others, on a new approach for analyzing and managing a macro-financial risk. So yes, Bob is the legend in our field, but he's super approachable. And I know we have here lots of students and so on who might think like, well, you know, this is Nobel Prize winner. Yes, he is, but he's approachable. He works with students. He really cares about students, he cares about your ideas, interests, and contributions to the field that he actually created. So I would like to extend warm welcome from the whole UMass community in Eisenberg School of Management. In this room, we have undergraduate students, PhD students, graduate students in economics and finance, as well as STEM students and faculty and finance faculty. And we are very excited to welcome you here. We also would like to, also as Hossein Kazemi mentioned, welcome the pioneer to the field who actually started the finance economics and to celebrate the 50 years of Black-Scholes-Merton option pricing. With that, let's welcome Professor Merton, 1997 Nobel laureate of economic sciences, School of Management, distinguished professor of finance at MIT, and a resident scientist in Dimensional Holdings. Bob, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. After an introduction like that, if I was truly rational man, capital R, capital M, I say thank you very much and sit down, because clearly with those thank you for your kind introduction. I won't be able to live up to it, but you set a North Star. I'm going to keep track of time. As you all know, professors love to talk, and I'm one of those who really talk a lot, and you might be here a very long time if I don't keep track of it. The other thing is I want to make sure that I don't get a phone call from some robo that tells me that I should stop talking and listen. Let me see where I can find the thing that does that. Okay. Oops. Sounds, yes, that's good. Didn't want to do it. Maybe there's oh, there we go. Okay, now the second one is to get the clock back. Sorry about this. I should be more efficient, but all right. Start. Okay, well, thank you again for coming, and I'm delighted to be here on this day of celebration. I have a topic to talk, and that's what I'm going to spend most of my time on. But this is part of a larger celebration that, as was noted, started a month ago and is continuing today. And I thought I'd frame it by giving you a little bit of background on the model and some aspects of it, what I think about it. I heard from Myron Scholes, so you were here, or you see it, others, and so this is just one piece looked at from my perspective. And I hope it feeds well into the talk. For those of you who know about how the model is derived, what Fisher Black and Myron Scholes did, but they had the idea, they wanted to try to figure out how to price options. And you all, those who've studied finance know there's a simple formula to relate, say, futures prices to cash prices. Very simple, it's well known. If you don't know it, just take my word for it, okay? That's because they have a linear relation. And portfolio trading is linear. Therefore, it's pretty easy to show that to avoid things like arbitrage, there has to be a specific price relation between the two. Options are nonlinear in their payoffs, and therefore you can't do that, or you think you can't do that. What Fisher and Myron's insight was, what if we took a portfolio, we put the option in the portfolio, we put the stock with the options on and the risk-free asset, and you went long and short them in some way so as to keep the, I guess I'm going to use jargon, the risk, the beta of that portfolio constant at zero. And then they applied an equilibrium theory called the capital asset pricing model, for which Bill Sharp won the Nobel Prize which says that if a portfolio, an asset, a security has a zero beta, its expected return in equilibrium has to be equal to the risk-free rate, the interest rate. Okay, so this is a fast pass through that what that is. So what their insight was, there's no fixed position you can take in the stock and cash to replicate or to offset this risk because of the nonlinearity. Their insight was, as the price changes of the stock and time changes, keep changing the mix of the portfolio, always with the objective of keeping the beta zero. That was their insight. And that's what they did in their first draft paper. And when they did that, they derived using the equilibrium condition that zero and beta portfolio has to have risk-free rate for expected return. They got a formula for the option. Now, when Myron was teaching at MIT, we were colleagues, he came to me and he told me about this. He told me, I think it was a Friday. You're getting it from the horse's mouth, but of course, more than 50 years ago. So sometimes it may be a little changed, but I believe it was a Friday. He told me about it. And I said, Myron, I don't think it's going to work. I went home and then I had developed before that a whole class of, I solved the lifetime consumption portfolio problem and did it in continuous time rather than discrete, continuous time. So I specified the trading interval was continuous. And that was fine to do. You could show mathematically it was very close to the reality of the time, which is, again, you have to understand this is in the 1960s, a long time ago. That it was a justifiable assumption that could make sense. And I wanted to solve that problem because it was also mathematically much more complex. It was a mountain to climb. So I had solved that problem. So I had a technology for trading continuously. So it was natural when I took what they had done and put it in my model to see what happened. And when I looked at it over the weekend, I came back on Monday and I said to Myron, you guys, the formula is right, but you have the wrong reason. They took it well. And I explained to them, I said, the way you did it is you got rid of the systematic, the beta risk. I'm saying when I do what you did in this model, it gets rid of all the risk. So not just the systematic part, but sigma zero rather than beta zero, for if you want jargon, okay? Now that can only happen if what? If inside that portfolio, you're mixing the stock, the option that sits there, and stock and cash, it can only happen is the mixing rule that you're using with the stock and cash exactly offsets the payoff to the option. Otherwise, it'd be variation. I mean, that's just common sense. So what does that tell you? It says that if you can trade continuously in the limit, you can actually replicate by trading in the stock and the risk-free asset, the payoffs to the options, not the expected value, not on the whole and on the average, not as an approximation, but as a precise result. And that came to be called what's called replicating portfolio, because you could replicate the payoff to the option even if there was no option. So if he wanted an option and there were none, I could trade on this strategy and manufacture it for him. Now, the condition that implied was in order to avoid arbitrage, and you know, arbitrage like a vacuum is something that's not sustainable. So that's about the most powerful theorem in economics, in my view, a non-trivial one, which says that you can't have arbitrage. Okay, it's very powerful, but in any case, that's a judgment. So what this meant was that no arbitrage is a necessary condition for every equilibrium model, which means any equilibrium model will give you the same answer because it's a necessary condition. So that not only generalized from what they did, which was phenomenal of using a particular equilibrium model, it says you could use any one. Okay, so that generalized. Now, how this connects up, because I can go on too long about this. How does this connect up to today's talk and to why I think the option model 50 years later is still being used? It's obviously been 50 years and been an enormous amount of innovation, enormous amount of new science, etc. And yet it still gets used. And the concept that it was built on, particularly the replicating concept. By the way, that's why I got shared in the Nobel Prize. It wasn't because I put in dividends or stochastic interest rates or those kind of high, those little ornaments on the tree. But it was for the fact that showing that this, what I just described to you, that was my contribution. Okay? Now, what happened in the 1970s? Well, before that, up by the end of the 1960s, finance was a science. Starting with, who unfortunately, sadly passed away this year, Harry Markowitz in 1952. Okay, I marked the beginning of finance as a science in 1952. I don't say Harry Markowitz was the father of modern finance, but he certainly was there. He was the beginning, in my view. If you look at the progress, by the end of the 1960s, there was a rich set of theories and importantly, a huge amount of data. You all look at data in huge amounts, but especially financial data. That didn't exist until 1964. Prior to that, there was no financial data. You couldn't test anything of merit. It was just a series of stories. So that altogether made finance a science. But by the end of the 1960s, it was a full science. And by the way, I count 8 Nobel Prizes that were connected to finance in economics. People's, at least part or all of their prize. So, you know, it's a science, okay? But it had virtually no impact on practice by the end of the 60s. Wasn't being used. In the 70s, there was an explosion, I won't tell you all the story, that brought finance science directly into finance practice in such a powerful way. You couldn't do the things that had to be done in the 70s and the 80s in the middle of a crisis that makes even the ones we've seen recently, in my view, in finance, really all kinds of things happen, but I won't get into that. The two of them came together. And finance science is probably, certainly within economics, probably one of the most connected with mainstream practice that you'll find within economics. And that relationship has continued ever since. And so, you know, the most advanced work, both empirical and new theoretical structures, have get brought into finance practice very rapidly. And the two are all connected. Now, what happened in the 70s was the creation of financial engineering. And financial engineering, like all engineering, is taking the science and solving real problems with it. Now, how does this connect up to the option model? I believe, this is my interpretation, the option model doesn't give you the market price of options, what you would observe in the marketplaces. It gives you the production cost for the lowest cost producer. Those of you, all of you, I think, have studied microeconomics, right? You know, that the lowest cost producer is sort of the first part you think is in. They're probably, well, in a competitive market, they'll set, any market, they'll set the price, but the price may not be equal to the cost. So the production cost may not be the price. Under very rare conditions, full competition it is. So that's why I say, when you look at replication, what are we doing? I just manufactured for him an option that didn't exist. I took the formulas, I took the equations that gave us both. The formula tells you how much it's going to cost me to produce it for. It doesn't tell me what I'm going to charge him. I'm going to charge him what he's willing to pay me. Okay. And if I have a monopoly, it's going to be a lot higher than the price that it cost me to produce it. So you see, from your standard economics, microeconomics, the difference between the production cost and the price. Okay. The option model gives you the production cost. And under certain idealized conditions, it will give you the price. But think of it as a production. So this gave a production theory complete, not just the cost, but how to manufacture it, because it gives you a rule of trading every point in time. If the stock is this, if the interest rate is this, blah, 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 do this. And if you do this every time and you don't make any mistakes, you'll exactly replicate the outcome. You'll manufacture it. It's an assembly line, just like you would produce the automobile or whatever. And so that's what the theory is. It's a theory of production. So that's why I believe it's survived to today, still being of interest. Because whatever else happens, all that technology has been vastly improved, but it's the same principle and the same idea. And that's why I think financial engineering got a big boost. Because if I'm an engineer, I'm out solving problems, he gives me his problem, I have to find a solution. And that solution may not exist in the market. I can't just go out and buy the parts or buy it. I have to assemble it. I have to create it. Get the point? Okay. And so that's my belief is one of the reasons that this particular development had such an impact. At the time, it had an enormous impact, which was in itself surprising, but it's still having an impact 50 years later. Okay. I think I've gone on long enough about it. Thank you. Why do I use that? But now I'm going to get to my talk. My talk today is an example of financial engineering. It's solving a problem. It's starting with an important problem, or I think it's important, but I think you would probably agree, and say, what can we do to try to solve this, get better? And the problem comes from the global challenge on funding retirement, which I'm sure you're all aware of. It's hard with it, which applies in every country. There's none that are really out of it. So this is a big global problem, and I'm going to show you this a piece of the solution. This is not the whole solution. That'd be pretty arrogant. But this is a solution we came up to solve a particular problem in this that's a global challenge, and we call that solution a return. What happened?
No, just
Something missing?
the technology, right?
Oh, did something happen? We
No,
lost it.
No,
We went to serve it wrong.
no. It's not. We're all sick.
All
There
right,
you go.
gosh. If this was MIT, this would be my favorite joke, everything works except the technology. Okay. Oh, anyway, so I'm going to talk to you about an innovation called retirement security bond. If you look up the literature, and you're going to make the slides available if people want them.
Yes.
You'll find in the appendix the references to the scientific work which took place 2016 to 2020. Okay. For this. And what we were trying to address is the problem that exists everywhere in the world, but in some parts of the world in huge amounts, which is everybody needs to prepare for retirement as part of the life cycle. People who are in the unofficial sector, you all understand what that is, the informal sector, whatever you call it, generally don't have access to pension plans or even Social Security. They're outside the system. And in some countries, that's as much as half of the population. So if you're going to have a solution for retirement for your country, you got to take care of the people in the informal sector. You have to take care of those people who have no retirement accounts, but still need to prepare for retirement. And that's what this was initially designed to do. And I'm going to take you through it because I'm going to take you through the design, how it was done, and why the details matter. This idea that someone sits there with a napkin and scratch some things out, the answer is a nice story, and it may motivate you thinking about it, but it will not give you the answer that that will work. For things like this, the devil is very much in showing the details. Easy to 100,000 feet to say, yeah, this will solve it. Now you go take care of it. So that's one of the things I want you to get from this. And so that's where we're going to start. But then to tip my hand a little, it turned out after we solved it, it happens to have a lot more use, much more general use. And that I want to show you too. So this is an example of one innovation, one engineering solution that from a policy point of view, forget country policy, but from a policy point of view, addresses a multiple set of issues all in one solution. We didn't plan it that way, but it appears that's the way it's come out. Okay, so you ready to get going through what this is? I told you sort of it's dealing to facilitate a bunch of things. Now, before I get into it, I tell you, this is an example of a design principle which I don't say is unique to me, but it's one that I firmly believe in finance, and sadly we don't do a very good job in practice, which is we should create financial products that the users, based on what the users already know. Now that sounds like a pretty reasonable thing to say, but if you look at financial products, you'll see that isn't the way they're designed. In fact, if you get involved at all listening about retirement, they're all talking about we have to create financial education for people. We'll have to put it on the internet. We'll have to get AI to crawl into their heads or something and teach them, but that they have to learn a whole bunch of things in order to be able to use their retirement products versus something that's doing this. And I'll talk a little bit more about it, but that's one thing. So I want to show you this as an example of a design that was designed with much broader implications than just its particular solution. Now, before you start solving something, you have to establish what's the goal or the objectives. So if we're going to talk about helping people get to a good retirement with this bond, then we have to decide what is a good retirement? Where are you trying to go? You know, if you tell your travel agent, they could be very efficient at doing things, but if you don't tell them where you want to go, it's very hard for them to create an optimal travel plan. So the goal for retirement, and this, you know, if you ask me, what would be a good retirement for you? I haven't met one yet. This is what I would tell you is probably a pretty good guess of what would be a good retirement for you, which is the idea that you have sufficient income in retirement for the rest of your life. That's what retirement is, the last part of the life cycle, such that you can sustain the standard of living that you enjoyed at the latter part of your work life, right before you retire, for the rest of your life. Now, we all like more, but that'll be pretty good. Now, we're looking at this group, you're in a different vintage, so it's hard for you to relate to this unless you think of grandparents, probably. But the point is, you're going to get there. All right. And I assure you that while you might want to live better, you really don't want to live worse. You don't want to cut your standard of living when you retire. You don't want to see it as going down. So that's the motivation, and that's what I'm going to use the goal. And so think of when you look at the solution, how does this help people get to the goal? This isn't about giving people money for retirement, and it isn't even telling them how to invest or anything. But it's giving them a way to, if they want to try to save for retirement, they want to take care of themselves. And most people don't want to do that. Survival seems to be a pretty strong motivation for everything. Okay, then this is a tool designed for, to begin with, people in the informal sector. And I define the informal sector characteristics as being, they have no advice and no one that's going to be able to tell them what to do. And that they have a very modest formal education. In fact, this design was, we had on the picture board, a person with a 6th grade education should be able to use this with no help. That's the goal. I mean, that's the design. Why? Because of the reason that I just given. If you have an advisor or something, that's very nice. But to tell people who can't get an advisor, have an advisor is not a very useful thing. Okay, so that's the motivation of what it is. And I point out to you two things. That standard of living is always measured by income. You know, if I come in this lovely town and I say, I really like it here. And I say, what would it take so I could live here? I doubt that you would say to me, you need $2,362,412 in your bank account. You would say, you have to be earning about such and such amount to live here in a style like that. So I'm just reminding you, the goal here is not a wealth goal, it's an income goal. And that's very different. Okay. Now, what is an RFB? Well, the first statement is, it's a full faith and credit government bond issued by the government, the highest credit rating. In the United States, it'd be a U.S. full faith and credit treasury bond, or note. Not an agency bond, not a pension, not a social security. Full faith and credit bond. Now, you'll see why that's important, but the key element is here that it's just something that everybody knows. It's a government bond. So every time you might have a question for me, does it do this? First ask yourself, It's a government bond. So for example, sadly, you have this bond and you passed away. You have pension, maybe that disappears, or an annuity. What happens? The same thing that happens if that happens to you when you have a regular government bond. So you see how it answers lots of questions. So that's the first thing I find out. But what's different about it is its payoffs. The payoffs are designed to mimic the payoffs to a pension. If we're trying to help people who don't have pensions be able to save for retirement, this is what we're trying to do. So we're trying to mimic the payouts that you would get if you did have a pension, you saved money and you did have a pension when you don't. Okay? That's not the payouts you'll see on US government bonds or any other country's bonds. So the payout structure is different. In fact, you know, you could almost call it a pension bond if you wanted to, but that is too confining. And so the two features that are critically different about it than a standard, let's say, 20-year US Treasury bond is there are no payments on the bond after you buy it for a number of years, no payments. And then at a trigger date in the future, specified, of course, you then start to get a stream of payments. And those payments are going to be level payments for a period of time, 20 years, 25 years, whatever it is. And when they stop, there's nothing left. So if you think of a regular treasury bond, what is it? You buy the bond, every 6 months it pays you interest, you get a payment. And then when the bond matures, they pay you your principal back, a big lump sum. That's a standard payout. This isn't at all like that. So it's a full faith and credit government bond, tax and everything same for the moment. Just the payments are different. The second element of the payments is the payments are not in nominal dollars or whatever the currency is. The payments are indexed to aggregate per capita consumption. So you all are aware that we have inflation protected bonds issued by the US government and many other governments. They're called TIPS, which pay you, a real rate plus inflation, the nominal payment. Okay. So that's well established, but we're doing differently. We're not linking it just to inflation. We're linking it to aggregate per capita consumption, which contains two things, and you'll see why we do this. It contains inflation, of course, and the right kind of inflation, consumption inflation, which is what you care about in retirement. You don't care about the producer price index or some other thing. You care about, so it's the right index of inflation. But what else does it do? It gives you the benefits of standard living improvements. In other words, if consumption for people on average rises more than inflation, so you have real gains. If you link to that, you'll get both the real as well as the inflation. If you buy an inflation-linked bond, you're locking in the standard of living at the time you bought it. At your age, if you bought one, would you like to lock in your retirement standard of living at today's standard of living, especially as students? No, I don't think so. Okay, and remember the goal. I want to find you because the goal is what tells you, are you on the right path? To meet the goal, which is the latter part of it, not the average of what you lived, how you lived during your life, how you're living at the end of your life, then you need to cover all the improvements or decreases, but the improvements in standard of living over the next 50 years for some of you, 40, 50 years. You see what I'm saying? Okay. So two differences. One, the payment stream is strange compared to standard bonds. And two, it's indexed to per capita consumption. Aggregate per capita consumption. All right. Now, the bonds themselves are issued with dates on it, but not their maturity date. Bonds today, they put the date that they mature when you get that last payment, 20 years from now, 30 years from now. They have a different date on it. They have a date on when the payments on that bond start, not when they end. Okay, and I'll give you examples. And so the way you want to think of these is the government issues a whole bunch of these bonds. They all have the same number of year payments and all the other terms are the same. And once a bond is issued, it remains available until they run out. So it's not like we issue a 30-year bond now, and then a year from now, we issue a different 30-year bond. That first 30-year bond stays. So everything stays. So what are you going to see on the shelf at Treasury? You're going to see a whole bunch of these, we call them RSBs, okay, with different starting dates. Some started, or even some are already started paying, but they're certainly all listed there. So you'll see a bunch of different dates. Now, what you're going to do if you want to buy one of these is, when do you want the payments to start? At retirement age. Okay? So if you're, I don't know, going to retire in 2058, you're not going to retire, it'll be later, but it's 2058, that's a good enough distance in the future. As long as you're going to retire in 2058, the only bond you buy of this type, when you're on the shelf, remember they're all different dates, is the 2058. So as long as your retirement age doesn't change, that you choose to retire, this is the bond you always buy. You buy it now, you buy it about 5 years from now, you buy it 15 years from now, you buy it 20 years from now. You understand? It's the same bond. Purpose being that when you bought that bond, whenever you bought it, when you look at what you have just one item, that bond. Got it? Okay, so that tells you pretty much what it is. And by the way, there are no subsidies in these bonds. We'll talk, if we have time, a little bit about how it gets implemented in more detail. But basically, they're either going to be done at auction, but they may be very small amounts for people. Remember, this is for, especially informal sector, there's very small amounts. So the Treasury will issue them in small amounts as an efficiency. Okay, it doesn't make sense to have an auction for tiny little amounts of bonds, but they'll all be priced off the auction and the traded market of the regular size bonds that trade like they do in the Treasury market now. So there are no subsidies. This is not a thing. This is, you're buying it at fair prices, market prices. You're not getting it. There's no hidden, benefits of getting it cheaper here. You understand? That's the nature of it. All right, that tells you what it is. Now let me take the example, since I mentioned 2058. We have a 30-year-old plans to retire at 65, so that's 2058. All right, and when he or she goes into to the Treasury, what do they look for? Well, it's like when you go to a shoe store. What do you look for? What's the first thing you look at? Other than, your eye might caught something in the window, but what do you systematically look at? Size, right? If you're a size 6, no point going and looking at the 12s and vice versa, right? So think of this as like buying shoes. You go into the Treasury, as long as this person is going to retire in 2058, the first thing he does is go where the 2058 bond is, and he doesn't even look at any of the others. So there's lots of them there, but he doesn't have to go shopping around. He just goes to 2050 or she goes there. All right. So now if they do that, let's just say it pays $10 a year. I'll tell you actually the real world how it will be more precisely, but just so you can grasp it. Each bond pays $10 a year. And let's say it's going to pay for, a fixed number of years, whatever they trade 20 years for the moment. Okay, and we know it's indexed. So what happens is the payments that are going to be paid are indexed to aggregate consumption until when it starts paying. That's 27, between 2058 27. Then it's only indexed to inflation. Why? Because we promised you to lock in your standard of living. If you want to keep it going and could, that's a different version. But we're doing exactly what you agreed to. Is a good retirement. So that's why we lock it in at that point. Now, imagine this person. What do they have to know in order to make a decision about buying these bonds? Remember, they're doing this on their own. No help. Okay. Well, first you have to know which bond to buy. You have to know your shoe size. Well, I think that's not too difficult. You can pick your own. Or if you really can't imagine what it is, I would say as the default, when does Social Security normally start paying? If you want to read it, I'm sure you can do it when we finish. Or if you're bored, read it now. Anyway, so let's just look at this individual because this is help you to understand at the time. What does this person need to know in order to make a decision to buy this bond, or how many? First, what date? I said to you before the announcements that you pick the retirement date. So, and if you can't figure that out, you say, I don't know. Then there's a default out there. It's pretty simple. So you don't have to have a big education to get that. We're assuming that an adult who takes care of themselves, even if they have a modest education, they understand life, they budget things, they pay for things, they make decisions. They can get the retirement date that they need. That's what they need. They either figure it out themselves or make a guess, or if they don't know, just tell them, look at what Social Security is going to be paying normally. And that's a good estimate to start with. At your age, it's not going to make much difference if you decide you're going to retire earlier or later. But in any case, so that's how we get the first one. Now, what is your goal for a good retirement? I say here on the book, your goal is 50,000 a year. Now remember, this is corrected for inflation and all these other things, right? So in order to know what your goal is, if you don't know what your goal is, again, you don't know where you want to be, and you don't know how you're doing unless you have a benchmark. Okay. Well, if your goal is 50,000 a year, and each bond's going to pay $10 a year, how many bonds do you have for a goal? 5,000. So as long as you can divide 10 into 50, you can get that answer. So your goal is 5,000. Now, where do we get the 50 from? That may be complicated. What do we say? How are you living now? Not how you plan to live or hope to. You can put all that in if you know it. But how are you living now? Say you're living on 50. Or you put any number you want. You're living now on 50. That's the number you put into your goal. Why? Because the bond is going to take care of any change in standard of living and any inflation. So how you're living now, corrected for in general increases in standard of living, so you get all those improvements, plus, of course, inflation, because you're going to be paid in dollars or whatever, okay? That's the number. So you don't have to say, geez, let me do some forecasts and let me get an AI machine to go through and analyze all of this and tell me, which is very nice to do if you have the resources to do it. But if you have a 6th grade education and you're in the woods, okay, it's not probably going to do very much good to do it. So you just say, however you're living now, put that in. That people know how they're living. So the only 2 pieces of information needed for this person to know what bond and what their goal, how many bonds they need, where they would like to go, sort of the end result when they know they've gotten to nirvana of what they want. We have just these 2 pieces of information. And if you think about it, those are information that almost everybody has who's an adult taking care of himself. Okay, so that meets that. Now, what about they start now and like you started now, and then 15 years from now you ask, how am I doing? How am I doing on my way to the goal? I mean, that would be a pretty reasonable thing because you've got to make decisions on how many you buy of these bonds and when you buy them, right? Just like anything else, when you buy food or transportation or anything else, you make decisions and you got to know when you buy it. Well, suppose you own 3,000 bonds. You know how many bonds you own. Well, you instantly know what. If you stop now, you'll have 30,000 a year for life, or for 20 years, in 2058. If your goal is 50,000, 5,000 bonds, you're 60% of the way there. So now you have a benchmark as to what you need to do somehow between now and when you get to 2058. So at any point in time, you can do it. Now stop for a second and think about that. you can think about right now how you're living, and then say to yourself, how would I be living on 60% of what I'm living on? Some people will say, no way. Then you're telling yourself, you got to get more. How much more? Not as much as you can. That doesn't help you very much because you have lots of other things you want to buy, including leisure clients. Okay. So this tells you your goal to get to a good retirement at any time and tells you how far you are to that goal. Now, in terms of thinking, and the reason I'm doing this with you, because I want you to put yourself in the place of someone actually trying to think about this. Think about it, not do the analysis of any formal analysis. One person might say when they look at that, say, you know, my children are all going to be grown up. I don't plan to look after them when I'm in retirement. They're going to be on their own. I've got to give them education, whatever, but they'll be gone. And actually, I love bird watching. And bird watching isn't all that expensive. And I actually live fairly modestly by choice. I don't feel, any that I'm constrained. I mean, we'd always like more, but I'm comfortable. So maybe, maybe 30,000 would be good enough for me. Someone else will say, no way I can live like that. You see how different preferences, each person can go through that experiment because you put it in units they understand. They're living on 50. You're telling them they've got 30 in the drawer. And now they can think about what that means. And each of them can think about it without having to be coached, without having to be told what they should want. But think about it in the same way they do, all of us do, every time we buy things or we make a budget. We think about what we want, we're constrained, and what are we going to spend our money on? And maybe this year you say, gee, we're going to have to fix the garage and a bunch of other things. So I don't think we can buy any RSPs this year. But next year, we're going to try to buy more. So the whole idea is to take this, if you've looked at any things for retirement, you've seen all this stuff and you've played around with, all these services and everything. They have all these, projections and all this stuff and calculating all this other things. You notice there's no mention of interest rate here, is there? There's no mention of rate of return at all. And there's no mention of forecasting inflation or forecasting what the future is going to be. Okay? All you have is the price of the RSP. Just like you have the price of the shoes when you went into the store. You look at the price and maybe the price is higher and you're like, well, that's life. You do that with food and everything else. So this is nothing new. Okay? And looking at the price and looking at helping you to figure out what you need for your goal, you make a decision, you make a plan. And it's your plan based on your life, the way you are. Is it perfect? No, but it's you. And no machine is going to do it better for you, in my view. It can answer questions for you, but it can't really do that for you. So I'm going through this detail because I want you to see we're designing this to really work. Not a hypothetical, if you knew about interest rates. And if you look at the current way things are done, you have this compound interest, as soon as you mention that, you have to become financially literate. Okay? And in fact, if you look at your 401ks or any of these retirement accounts, what do they show you? They show you the value of the account. You have $1 million in your account, which would be a lot of money, depends what age you are, but a lot of money. Do you have any idea where you are towards a good retirement? Absolutely not. Not even my MIT colleagues with 3 PhDs, 140 IQs, and technology can answer that question with that information. Why? Because the 10-year treasury, for example, today is down to about 4.3%. It was up to 5%. So $1 million is $43,000 in income. Okay. What was it 4 years ago? 60 basis points. That's $6,000 a year. What was it 15 years ago? $50,000 a year. So $1 million could mean $50,000 a year in income, $40,000 in income, or $6,000 in income. You have no clue. we're giving people the wrong numbers. If you give people the right numbers, they can make very good decisions, but we're not doing that. That's an example of not designing on basis of what things people already know.
So this is an assumption, like you're 30-year-old, you have to start thinking about that. So how long can you be like, can let yourself not think about the fact? Like, what is the
Well,
error?
Look, we're not trying to, one of the biggest mistakes you can make if you're trying to design solutions, whether you're gonna go to a venture capitalist to do this, get them to fund you, is to try to put everything that don't go together into one package, because you'll guarantee every time you add something in another dimension, you're gonna get reasons why you can't do it. And you're gonna have to convince more and more and more people. We've seen at the level of our whole federal government, how well we're doing at that. Okay? So my advice to you in general is design something that's complete, but don't put anything in there that isn't what your contribution is. That's a very interesting problem, but it isn't the problem we're solving. What we're solving is providing a vehicle that somebody who wants to save can without having to be financially literate. Based on what they already can think about. That's the problem we're solving. And that's why we don't put subsidies in. So wouldn't it be nice if we issued these bonds? And if we put that piece in as an example, let's let people that are under the age of X or under the income of X have it. Not that I'm opposed to subsidies, you understand? That's fine. But if you put that in the bond issue, you're gonna have a fight of your life to get it done, because there are gonna be people who don't believe that you should be giving that subsidy in that way, especially since anybody can buy it. So, you understand what I'm saying? So that's my answer is try to make it something that is, this is not controversial in itself. Because it's not a subsidy, it's not, I'm making no adjustment. That gives you a chance of success of getting it done. Okay, yes, sir.
So I believe that RSD products are more for developed countries. For example, in African countries and other countries in the world that are developing countries, you do not really think about retirement process. I live today, I think about, how am I going to live tomorrow? So people think about day by day, right? So they won't really be concerned about that process. So what is it?
Well, but that's a very good point, and that's an important element, but that's not what this is for. This doesn't answer that purposely for what I just said. Because now you're telling me, how do I educate people in Africa to think longer than they're thinking, or to recognize this, which is a worthy thing to do. That doesn't be in Africa, by the way, it's in most parts of the world. Good, work on that. But that's not what this is. If I put that in there, I'm trying to solve two compound problems in one solution. That almost never works. What you're talking about is a whole, an enormous problem to be addressed. Now, what this does do is, if you educate those people to think about the future, this will give them the means to do it. If they don't have the means to do it and you educate them, it's not going to do them any good. So we're providing here the thing that allows, if you can get them to think about the future. And by the way, I think in some cases, especially as people get a bit older, they do think about retirement. Now, retirement's lots of different things, we can get off on that. I'll just mention one thing. In agrarian countries, the retirement system has traditionally been the family. You have a farm, or you lease a farm, you have children, you raise the children, they work on the farm with you, and when you no longer want to work or can work, you give them the farm, but what do? They have to look after you the rest of your life. That's a retirement system. It works well in an agrarian country. If the agrarian country becomes industrial and the kids go off to the city, it's no longer doable. So there are lots of ways to do what you're talking about, both tools, and it's a very important thing to do. So don't mishear me. This is the vehicle that works anywhere in the world that has a bond market. Because all you need is a government bond market. Now, some places don't, but they do. All right. So if we can't solve all 8 billion people and all 214 countries, I'm an engineer. Nirvana, perfection is for the gods, but that's a good thing to look at. I'll settle for better and better and better. So if we can get 102 countries Or if we can take 3 countries in Latin America that don't have this, if this addresses it, it's worth it.
And even here, when you are thinking about retirement, those are who are close to retirement, right?
Yeah.
Those, they also think about like, they have like, many of them are not healthy. Also, like when you grow old, that's when you see, disease and other things coming in play. So how do you take that into account here? If you take someone who is 60-year-old, you take someone who is 70 years old, so they might make a wrong decision. Even if they make a right decision, like something could happen down the road, 5 years from, and not like, then the retirement.
Is there anything that does that? Tell me anybody who's solved that problem.
No, I'm just.
No, I'm teasing you a little bit, but I'm making the point. All the time when you do innovation, this is a general thing. The first thing you're gonna find is resistance. Status quo is always comfortable. Either that's because I can do it, that's my job, and I know how to do it. And if you're gonna change things, I may not be able to do it, and that's scary, appropriately so. But in general, people will say, you can't do it. Why? It's not being done, or something like that. So you're always gonna have people say, but it doesn't, then the next thing I get is, but it doesn't do this. Well, if nothing on the planet now does what you asked me it doesn't do, how can you hold me to a standard with something to do something that no one has ever been able to do? So my point, we haven't done that, some of these things yet. You can't hold that as a reason not to do this. What I said to you is, if you solve that other problem, the important one you raised, and this is there, this is the way you can then say to him or her, now you understand what you want to think about it. Do you understand? Yes. Okay, here's how you can do that. The key here, going back just, is think of this as just one item in a budget. The garage, food, things, and your retirement. You see what I'm saying? And all you're looking at is a price today, because you're making a decision today. You decide to buy today or you decide not, and then you decide how much. And that you do all the time with everything. And prices change, and this price will change. Okay? But that's nothing new to people. This is all familiar. Yes, sir.
I have 2 questions. One is, this is a very elegant solution. I like the idea, but you are revolutionizing the office of debt management at the Treasury Department. And I don't think it's a good
I'm gonna
idea to
cut you.
ask them to do.
I'm gonna cut you down on this, not because it's a good question. I'm gonna ask you to wait. This is the problem. This is a problem with taking questions before you finish. I have an answer for you.
One thing though is,
Okay, your second question.
that here you are putting a lot of long-term capital into the government instead of the real economy.
Okay, look. The sand in the gears, if you don't trust the government to do the right thing with money, we've got a bigger problem. I'm not saying it isn't a problem, but that's not a reason not to do this. You're issuing debt anyway. Governments all have to issue debt. In fact, you don't have to increase the amount of debt outstanding. You replace the debt you have now as it runs off, or you even buy it back. If there's a big demand for this, which you hope there would be because it means it's working, you don't, for example, people say, oh, isn't this going to balloon the debt? No. You balloon the debt when you just borrow money for any reason. Not because of these. You can use these to buy back or replace in the rollover other debt and keep the debt level the same. You've just given people that which is more useful to them. That's a fast answer. All right, I've got to move on. I see, as I feared, I got two things. We haven't even got. Now, let me just quickly show you again the devil in the details. Devil in the detail is, someone will say to me, and have said to me, well, Professor, that's a very elegant solution. But in the real world, you can buy 30-year tips, long-term bonds that protect for inflation. Yeah, this consumption standard living, so okay, but we already got that. Good enough. That's a statement. What I say to you, as scientists or as just people doing sensible things, just because someone says something doesn't mean it's true. You should confront it with the data. Look at the facts. and then decide whether that statement is accurate or not. So what I show you here is the following. Let's say our hypothetical 30-year-old buys bond. This is the pattern of payments when you buy the bond. The negative one, of course, is the money that goes out when you buy it. Then you'll notice up here, all the way along, there are no payouts on the RSB. So there's nothing. And then when you get to 2058, you get these level payments, they're all indexed, of course. Okay? That looks exactly what happens if you put your money in a pension. You contribute today to an IRA, 401k, you get nothing back till you retire. And when you do, if you get the kind of what people want, remember, it's an income goal. You get a stream of income. By the way, that looks just like Social Security, doesn't it? Or pensions or annuities, all things that people like. Okay, so this is nothing radical at all. Now, what happens when you buy the 30-year tip? You know, at 50,000 feet, it's good enough. Unless you are a dynamic trader of bonds on exchanges and you have resources, which we know how to do using enough, among other things, the model, this 50-year-old model, you can replicate the RSB in theory by trading these bonds. Sixth grade education, you really want to do that and incur the cost. So what happens if you buy that 30-year treasury, US Treasury tips? Every 6 months you get a coupon payment. You have to do something with it. And you know, it's probably not very much. You know, 97 cents, $1.50, or if you're lucky, $20. What are you gonna go down and do all that and then reinvest it and all that sort of, forget about commissions, forget about all that stuff. Even if it was free of just your time. And no, I think every 6 months you gotta take this small amounts of money and do something. Even if it's pushing a computer, you know, doing this online, you find out, as many people do, that sometimes takes longer. But in any case, every 6 months you do that. And then what happens? At the end of 30 years, you get a balloon payment, this big principal back, not in 2058 even, but 8 years earlier. Or 5 years later, whatever. So what is the pattern of payments? First, you have to make how many transactions? Well, you have to make one every 6 months for 30 years, so that's 60, plus your original purchase. And then you get this lump sum. Gosh knows what interest rate you'll earn on what the price of that bond will be at 30 years from now to replace. And you're subject to reinvestment risk, interest rate risk. You've got to make a major decision as to what to invest in. So you have a minimum of 61 transactions plus huge reinvestment risk. And it is huge if you look at the data. Okay, over the last 20 years in the United States, if you retired at the low interest rate versus a high interest rate, same amount of money, you're finding at 65, then you're roughly lost about 38% of the income combined wealth. That's not small for normal people, or for most people. Okay, so this is what I mean by the detail. This looks like it's an approximation. It's a horrible approximation. No one will do it. They'll spend that money. They'll get the $12 or something and they'll just say, no, I'll put it in my bank account. And you're done. And there are all kinds of decisions. So that's one reason for showing it. This shows, I use Korea, I've done this all over the world. This shows why it has the problem if you just do inflation and not the standard living. Because remember, the goal is standard living at the end of your work life, not when you bought the bond 30 years or 40 years earlier. What's the shortfall? Look at the last column. If it's 10 years, you were 13% less than you needed, even though you should have the right amount, but you have not covered the standard living. If it was 20 years, it's 2/3 and so forth. It's a big number. And it's complicated. Now they have to forecast standard living. They have to make, gee, standard livings go up. Now I got to do this. That's why we did that. It's a very simple thing. They don't have to think about. They don't have to forecast anything. Okay, so those are the two reasons. Now, in the time I have here, and I've taken a lot of your time because I've talked about so many things in more detail. But a fair question you might ask me is, great, Professor, but what's missing here that you have in Social Security or annuity or pension? Longevity risk. This is a bond. There's no question this is a bond. If it's a bond, first, its price does not depend on who owns it. Whereas if you have a pension, it surely depends on who's the age of the person who owns it. Okay, so this is a bond. It is not a pension. So how do we address that? Somebody gets the retirement. And by the way, I would say the time to make a decision whether you want to get an annuity, you know, so you get rid of longevity risk, that you outlive your money. You understand what longevity risk is. If you only have enough payments for 20 years and you live 30, you've got a problem, okay? If you buy a life annuity or if you have a pension, then if you live to be 120, they still keep paying you as the good books wish you. So that's what we mean by longevity risk. Bond will not protect you against longevity risk. So how do we deal with that? What's the fly in the ointment? Well, first, I would say the right time to make a decision of whether how much you want to annuitize, including 100%, is not when you're 30 or 40 or 50. You don't know where you're going to be when you retire at that time. You don't know whether you're going to be responsible for other people or people will be responsible for you. You don't know all kinds of things. And so to commit to that completely, 10, 20, 30 years is suboptimal. So how can we make it that you can have your cake and eat it too? And that is, you want this bond for all the good reasons, all right? Except it doesn't take longevity. So how many years does the bond pay? I said 20 in the example, but how do we set the number of years? How about if we set the number of years, first thought, at the life expectancy of someone, let's say 65, at age, conditional of being at age 65, you survive to 65, how long are you expected to live? Okay, you understand that number, right? Suppose we set that as the number of payments. Well, that's not going to do you much good affecting the longevity because some people live one day after they're 65, and some people live to be 100 and something. Okay, so for that individual, they got a lot of risk. But what do? We have things called insurance companies. And what do insurance companies do as a function? They sell you annuities. They sell you insurance on longevity. They sell you the guarantee for life payments, and they take that risk. But for them, because of the nature, the beauty of diversification, by doing it as an institution, doing it over millions of people, they can diversify away that big risk each of us has of whether we'll live a day or 30 or 40 years later. Right? That's why they're in business. The beauty of the financial system solving a very big problem by being able to create an institution that pools in a fashion to get rid of a risk that can be diversified away, but that no individual can.
Credit is high.
They're planning for retirement.
Okay, so what we do is, at least in a frictionless world, what should be true? If you arrive at this 2058, if you decide you want an annuity, remember you have a bond, you go to a well-run insurance company, and theoretically frictionless, you know, so we don't put costs there. I'll deal with costs in a moment. And you say, look, for you, there's no risk because you diversify all right. So this is like a risk-free, you know, insuring this is a risk-free enterprise. So what this is equivalent to is a risk-free bond with a maturity of life expectancy for the insurance company, not for you, big risk, but for the insurance company, it's no risk. So what should they be willing to do? They should be willing to swap a life annuity to you with $50,000 a year for RSPs with 50,000 a year. The key is the payment's the same. It's not, well, we're an insurance company. You want it for life? Well, okay, we'll do it, but we won't pay you 50, we'll pay you 46 or 42. As soon as you change that price downward, you now create a logjam for people. Now they have to think about and analyze, and am I gonna live longer? All those sorts of things, okay? So for behavioral reasons, we want the terms to be, when you get to retirement, you've got RSBs, you can change your RSBs for a life annuity, same payment. The rest of your life, or for 20 years, your choice, or 25 years, whatever you want to do. Get it? You see how smooth that is, and how that's gonna be an easy decision. Okay, now, finally, we have real costs, of course. We have a friction world, okay? Profits, you have to hire and pay for people, there's all the transactions, filling out the forms. Even if we have very low costs, fintech will help bring the cost down, but it won't make it zero by any means. So how do we fare that? If life expectancy, let's say, is 25 years, we'll make the RSB 27 years. The 2 extra years of payment will pay the insurance company for its expenses, profits, etc. But the payment swap is the same. You can have 27 years or you're protected for life. Same payment. You see how that works? And you just do your own introspection, how that would work with you for. You know you're paying more, but then there's real frictions in the world. I mean, you know, we all like to get things cheaper. That's of course the case. But you see how I'm doing this with you. I hope you don't think this is sort of, I don't know, very, detailed one. This is the sort of thing that makes the difference between something that can actually work, that will work, that people will use, and something that's a theoretical idea, but it's so vague when you talk about actually doing it, nobody will do it. So,
So I'm jumping ahead here, but if you talked about, trying to limit the necessity of financial education, but when you get insurance companies involved with that, start scaring people away a little bit as well.
Oh, it depends how you deal with it. Now you come back and you say, okay, what we're gonna tell people out there and help them with, and governments and the private sector can educate people, not on how to make compound interest decisions or forecast what the stock market's gonna do over the next 42 years, or what interest rates are going, all the garbage that professionals should deal with, but not for individuals. To be as if you ought to be able to drive a car, you have to understand how to build and how an internal combustion engine works. I mean, that's crazy, okay? So good question, but that's a well-defined thing to say, because you're not talking about making deals with insurance companies. You say, look, here's the deal. You get life, you get payments for life at 50,000 a year, or you keep your RSBs that will pay you 50,000 a year for 27 years. Now, the big one for you is if you're ill, if you have congestive heart disease, you're not likely to live anything close to the expected life expectancy of the pool, you're probably not going to buy the annuity. You're going to say, hey, look, life is tough, but, and you make that decision not when you're 35 or 25, you make that decision when you're 65 or whenever you're retiring. So you have the most information you're going to have. And you decide how much of it you're going to do. Those are things that people can think about. They understand their health. This idea, you work out, do all the stuff, and and think, no, that's good. I mean, your lifestyle will be better. There's not a lot of evidence that will increase your longevity. Okay, and so those are different elements. But what do people know? It's the sick people who know they're sick. That is why you get a bias in the annuity tables from the pool. It's not because people, I'm healthy, I know, that's the data, at least as far as I know. I'm not actuarial, but it's not very strong, if at all. But there are many other good reasons why to do it. Okay, so you get the idea. So we've dealt with, now you see how we dealt with longevity. So we've created a pension annuity for everybody. And we've given them the option of those who want it can have it, those who don't. And at the same time, You know, people won't buy annuities because they say, what happens to me if I buy $1 million policy and I die tomorrow and get hit by a car? Isn't that terrible? Well, it's terrible to get hit by the car and die. I agree with that for sure. But think about it. The annuity says, we'll pay you for as long as you need money, even if you live to 120. And what you do is you give it up when you don't need money. You're going someplace better where you won't need money. I think that's a pretty good trade. But if you frame it as tomorrow you could lose your whole million without realizing you don't care. You don't need money if something happens to you tomorrow. So the value of money to you is zero. But if you don't get that message across, it sounds very daunting. And that's what often biases people. You're going to have to use a lot of behavioral economics and finance and knowledge to design a good product. But I'm trying to show you you can do it. All right. Let me just run quickly ahead. Yeah, I'm sorry about this. I know I didn't even look at my file. So let me just say, first of all, when you get the notes, I believe that if you study this, you'll see this is an example of designing a product based on what people know. And you see how little they have to know. They only have to know a price and how many bonds they want. And that's a decision that every adult has to make every day about everything they buy. And so they can't live without that skill set. Okay. Where do you see this quickly? Automobiles. I was an engineer of advanced vehicle design for Ford Motor Company headquarters a long time ago. And so I use automobiles. If you get into a 1955 Ford and you get into a 2023 Ford, when you get in, first of all, you find steering wheels and so forth. There's talks about changing that, but right now they still find the same steering wheel more or less. But look at the accelerator, you know, the thing you push when you drive. Not only is it in the same place, not only is it more or less the same shape, but when you push those in the 55 Ford and the 23, they feel the same. Even though the 55 Ford had mechanical linkages that open a carburetor, lets air and gas in. And now it's all electronic. You can have the accelerator on the ceiling, on your dashboard, or anywhere you want. But they don't do that. Why? Because you know how to drive. If I put it somewhere else, you're going to have to learn how to drive again. And while you're learning, you're at risk that you're going to look for the accelerator to get around something, and you're going to, your foot is going to forget, or your finger will forget how to do it because you've been doing it. You know, we all drive. So those are all kinds of things. The other one, which is maybe more modern for you, automobiles are still around, but more modern for you, is consumer electronics. How many times have you heard, if you have to look at the manual in order to figure out how to use it, the product's in trouble? You should be able to take it out of the box and use it. And many times they even put the manual just on the web, you know, in case something goes wrong, to look something up. Those are examples, again, of ideas of building a product, a big major consumer product that is built on the idea, give them things that they already know how to do, and you get to do a lot better. All right, next, who will be the users? I talked about, you know, the informal, or, you know, the thing that motivated us. But if you think about it, how about people who have a pension? In Korea, the NPS pension, maximum payout is 41% replacement. A lot of people are not going to be able to live on very comfortably in a good retirement on 41% replacement of what they've been living on. So they'll need to do some of their own saving. Okay. They'll use this bond for the same reason. Okay. How about those who are covered, but you know, that they have a DC plan. You know what that is, 401ks. You have to make decisions. You're responsible. You have to make the decisions whether you turn it over to somebody else or not. Okay. This will help you with those people. Okay. And you want to offer. What about advisors? Those are people who you hire, if you can afford them, to give you the advice. These are wonderful tools that will give them a wonderful tool to custom design something to really fit better. So they'll love it. And who else will love it? Institutions, every pension fund. I wouldn't pay anybody high commissions to sell this, the pension funds. They're going to say, please give it to me. They don't need to be sold. they've got this huge liability of all these things they promised to pay people in the future. And in many countries, it's indexed not only to inflation, but other things like standard living, that's like Social Security is affected too. Okay? This is a perfect hedge for them. For the risk-free part of their portfolio. It matches their liability exactly. And that's the same for insurance companies who issue annuities. So I wouldn't pay anybody very much in the way of commission sale. This is an easy sale to institutions. If it's done this way, with all the credit. So you see that it has a very wide potential use in terms of things, even though it was originally designed for a very specific, but often large group, those who don't have any such thing. Second thing is, why government bond? Was that just because I think government should do it? No. Government, in my mind, is doing what I do, is an institution, like the private sectors are institutions. They're all tools that we as human beings have created to help us. I'm agnostic. I don't, you know, I don't think I don't have a religious belief that government's the right answer for everything or the other. They're just tools we use. Why did I pick government as the one to do this tool? First, if it was done in the private sector, and actually we've been approached by banks who want to do it, what would be the disclosure would have to have when you're issuing a bond that's going to pay, you know, in 30 years or 40 years? They're going to have the SEC or in this country a long list of, yes, this is what they promised you, but you have to understand that you may not get this. And here's all the, remember, think of who's buying this. That's a non-starter. Okay. Full faith and credit, that's why we make it full faith and credit, not an agency, not a pension agency, not some Fannie Mae or something else, the real deal. The only way you can default on these bonds is by defaulting on the whole country's debt. And that's as good as you can do in my mind. I cannot guarantee you what a country can do. So if it's a country that has maybe risk of default, I'm sorry, I can't do anything about it. Any country you're in, if you're a normal person, you're not a billionaire with money all over the world on a jet plane to get out of town. If you're a normal person, I can't do anything about that. That's the nature of government. Okay, they can tax you, but they can do anything that they want within whatever they do. And if they default, they default. But I can't solve it. So you may say, well, in this country, they're going to default. And I'm going to say, you know what? I'm sorry, but it's like life itself. We take risks that I can't do anything about for you. And to pretend you can by saying, put your money offshore, that's not going to happen. So that's why it's the credit. If it's going to be a pedestal, one of the foundations of the retirement system, and it's going to be widely used, it has to be available every day, good times or bad. Hedge funds will only issue these when it's a good price, and they'll get out of town when they don't. So government is about as reliable an issuer because they always have to borrow money anyway, going back to your earlier comment about debt management. But what else is going on here? I'm going to come to your debt management. I haven't forgot about it. So let me just quickly go on. All right. Another prosaic reason, but very important, is because it's a U.S. government bond, the structure is already in place. You don't have to create a new structure. You don't have to have a special agency to issue these things. You don't have to create a new market to issue these things. They just get issued along with all the other government bonds. So all the structure that has been built in every country, and typically in any country, whatever the level of the bond market, the government bond market is usually the best. It's the ceiling under which all the private debt is more suspect, is because they're government. They can take what the private has, so there's no way you can be a better credit. So that helps. There's nothing new to build. But now I come to you. Your question. I got to sell those. You're quite right. The debt management people are tunnel focused. All they want is cheapest way to issue, and they don't want you to disrupt their bond market. And they don't care about anything else. And I'm not saying that's wrong. So I got to give them a carrot. Something that they say, oh, this is actually good for us. If you look at any bond market in the world, and I'm going back in history, I think of Italy before Euro and so forth is one of my favorite cases. If your bond market is held, the bonds are held by locals domestically, not foreigners. And they hold a large amount of it. And the maturity of it, in other words, these are long-term holdings. This is not overnight deposits that they can pull out or 30-day treasury bills. These are enormously long horizon. If you have it as a key part of the retirement system, it's going to be huge in there. This is going to increase the strength of your bond market, no matter who you are. We'll even do it for the US, although the US will probably be, well, who knows? I'm not gonna forecast. But if you go to many countries, this will have a huge effect. And why I mentioned Italy, if you look at Italy back in the Lira times, Italy has always had a huge amount of debt to GDP and everything relative to everybody else. But Italians don't buy stocks, they don't buy mutual funds, they buy Italian bonds, or at least they did before the euro. And for good reasons. So most, a huge amount of the Italian debt was owned by Italians. And it was long-term debt. In fact, they did a lot of financial engineering, but that's another story. Okay? So I'm glad you asked your question. But you have to get all the constituencies who you need to see that there's a benefit for what they do. And this is what the carrot can bring, particularly to many countries, to say, you can't lend, you can't borrow over 5 years. But you can with this, and that will bring in strength, because if you default, you're defaulting on your domestic population in big time on something that is critical, which is for retirement. That isn't usually a good political plan, even for dictators. Okay, so that's why you get an improvement, and that's what you sell to the debt management people. And you tell them, we're not going to allow the amount of debt to be any larger if you don't want it. And then finally, I would just mention as a hedge, and I think you're so happy I said finally, but it's a hedge. Countries, which doesn't include ours at the moment, that have a VAT tax. You've all seen that, right? Value-added tax. You know, there's a short answer for that. It's the consumption tax. Basically, it's a tax on consumption. Government is a natural issuer of a bond that is indexed to per capita, to aggregate per capita consumption. Because they have an asset, a huge asset, which is a perfect hedge. It's for your debt management people, it's a better hedge than issuing nominal bonds. Because when you issue nominal bonds, you do not have a perfect hedge of inflation. Inflation can go way up and the revenues coming in may not. That's a bet. But if you have something that is literally, the revenues are directly proportional to the payouts, you have what's called asset liability hedge. You have a perfectly hedged position. Your liabilities and your assets go up and down. So it's actually less risky to the government and therefore to the government's debt market to have it indexed to VAT, to consumption, than even nominal bonds, let alone inflation bonds. And again, I'm going this detail because I want you to feel, if you don't get all the lyrics, I hope you get the melody. That you need to get all of these things thought out. Your questions were great for this. You got to get everybody together and you got to design it so it really works. And maybe you get lucky. Finally, here's the payoff, a payoff. After all these years, and that not long, by innovation standards for something like this, Brazil in January of this year issued, they call them Rende Plus or Rende Mais. They issued the first version of this bond. Now it's a simplified version, but again, that makes sense and that's okay. I'm an engineer. They did it and they could get it done. And they did it through Treasury. They did it through these are full faith and credit, and they're issued by the Brazilian Treasury. This is not an agency bond. This is not something else. And actually, if you think about it, an RSB has a higher credit protection than in Social Security or pension. The government in the United States can change Social Security payments without defaulting, right? They'll never default. They just will change what they pay you. And most countries, if it's an agency, we say, you don't have to default to change the pension. These are full faith and credit. You cannot on a bond say, we've decided we want to pay you less and get away with it without defaulting. So it's not that I think that's an important feature, but it's actually an enhanced credit. And for young people who are worried that, We worry that when we retire, Social Security wouldn't pay us anything. And that's a very big danger. First of all, it takes away a lot of its benefit to you. It also makes you politically, let's say, susceptible to the idea of getting rid of Social Security because you're paying for it. You don't think you're going to get anything for it. If you have these bonds, unless the United States, if you're here, is willing to default on the entire 33 or 34 trillion, whatever the number is, that they have outstanding, which you can't do anything about. I can't do anything about that. You're protected because no matter what happens, they got to pay you if they don't want to default. So you can go look this up on their index, you know, and they have some simplifications. They also, to begin with, you can only buy, institutions can't buy it. Why? Of course, if I showed you why, it makes sense institutions should, but why not? Go back to your, people are worried that when you introduce something like this new, you might disrupt the bond market, the whole bond market, because institutions get in there and start doing things. So they said, let's do it just with individuals to begin with. And then Brazil has a very efficient treasury direct. They are selling these bonds in 30 real units. That's $6 US. You pay someone's house on a weekend. They give you $200, you know. What do I do with the 200? Oh, I'll buy some RSPs. I need this. Hey, I like, yeah.
Is there a secondary market for these yet?
No,
No.
because the buying and selling is directly from Treasury. It's individuals, it's very small units, which is very important. Because people, you know, they can buy little bits and pieces, and it may not seem big to us, but it's big to them. And the whole idea, and they can sell it, but it's all marked to market to the big treasuries, inflation treasuries and so forth. So there's no subsidies, but people also know they're gonna get better than the market price because they never could have done on their own trades that you get at auctions and in secondary market for them, because they're big units. Okay, and so you can look at, well, I don't know whether it'll succeed or not, but it started out pretty well. Actually, it turns out this is just on the side, but since we're looking at things, one of the things they find there's a disproportionate number. They have all kinds of data because, you know, now we have all the data. Women tend to be much bigger buyers of red days than men. And we don't know why, but other than the fact that some countries, women in many families are the financial decision makers, but that happens to be one piece of probably irrelevant for this discussion data, but you know, we'll see how it does. But it was done. A country went and did it, and they didn't do it because I went down there or like this is work I did with Arun Malatar, my co-author. You can see all the references. Because we went down there and they know about it. They did it because they thought it was a great idea, and Treasury people fell in love with it. They said they wanted to do this, and it was done over the election between Bolsonaro and Lula, which, if you understand anything about politics, you understand there's a big gap there. And in Brazil, the president has to sign in order for any bond to be issued. And they got it signed by the outgoing president after he'd been voted out of office. And the incoming president said, good idea. Now, you don't see that too often, but this goes back to my questions and answers. The more you had made this, if they had put a subsidy in here, they'd done anything else, they'd taken away Social Security and said, this is a replacement. Any of those things would have killed it. But by saying this is not a replacement, but an enhancement to a Social Security, it doesn't take anything away. And there's no subsidies. We're not getting monies to one group from another group. I'm not opposed to those in principle, you know, that's done. But it is a killer if you're trying to get something. So thank you very much for your time and your indulgence.
Much, I mean, this is, again, you innovated 50 years plus before and continue innovating, so that's great. So maybe let's do a couple of questions and then have lunch. Sanjay, you want to start?
Okay, so are you traveling to other countries to sell this?
Oh, yeah, no, I've been, not just on this, but I just got back I went to Melbourne, Sydney, Singapore, Beijing, Seoul, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, UAE by last month. Or this month. No, I mean, the reason I'm saying, yes, there's a lot of interest. Interest is different from reality. But the fact that a country's done it is a big deal. Because they've shown it can be done. And there's huge interest because this is a huge problem. It's not because they think it's a cool dude. It's a big problem that these countries have.
Just as one follow-up on that, suppose we had countries issuing a lot of long-term bonds,
Yeah.
which were going opposite in America, where with quantitative easing, we bought back on long-term bonds. But suppose these long-term bonds were available, let's say 30-year, 50-year, 100-year, even perpetual, then the intermediaries as insurance companies could create some of the things that you're saying, but we just don't have that available, so they cannot take the risk.
Why don't you have them available?
Like the US government doesn't issue them, like long.
Well, if they don't issue them, look, this is a little bit like I said, I can't protect you against your government defaulting. That's a risk I can't do anything about, and I don't think anybody else can. The UN can. So for sure I can. So I don't fool people by saying, oh yeah, it'll be fine, or, take your money and put it in stocks, because it's real. They can, Cyprus took 40% of every bank account one morning. Years ago. Governments can do basically anything. So the answer is, the best I can do is get a full faith and credit, and I got a government where the people, if you have a lot of people in this, that's why they like the bond market, the domestics owning it with long term, because if you do them in, you're putting the core of your population. It's not like we're taking it from foreigners and who cares? You're doing it to the people there for something that's very fundamental. It's not for the rich people who are saving, and you can find this class war. And it's no different from countries promise pensions, and they're very long-term debt. How can that be any different? You see what I'm saying? So yes, there may be some, but it can go either way, and that's really it.
Hossein and then Scott.
Yes, so we are in US, and this is a great product. So did you reach out to the US treasuries, and what are their thoughts? I guess that like when the US actually follows something, like does something, other countries follow.
Oh, sure.
So then what are they saying?
Very good question. And the answer is, at some level, yes, but I have not gone to see the people I really need to see at Treasury, and I believe I can see, because you only see those people once with an idea. And you don't want to go into a room when the one time you get to see them, because you don't keep coming back to the secretary or something and saying, and I want to follow up on my idea. You get that idea, you get it there. If it goes anywhere, it then goes to a group of staff, and they have to believe and love it. I told you, it worked in Brazil because Treasury people, they were buying them when they were issued. Okay, that's a good sign. So I haven't done that, partially because I think the people there have been, let's say, distracted. Like we weren't going to pay the government was going to have to shut down. We may have that again. We had a whole bunch of other things going on. That's not when I want to go in with something like this, which is it is an election year coming up, so that's a good reason to go. But the timing has to be right, and I don't think it's quite right, but maybe I'll have to do it. So that's the honest, direct answer to you. I haven't taken it formally to them because I'm concerned that I won't get the proper attention, understandably. So when look, you saw Janet Yellen having get up, the last time we were talking about, we're going to run out of money, we have to shut the government down, and we may even default on our debt, and we're certainly going to have if you're the Secretary of Treasury, you think you're going to be listening carefully to this presentation, even as an idea? So that's the simple answer. But I can tell you there's a huge amount of interest. So whether this turns out to be the solution or not, we'll see. But I know there's a huge amount of interest on the people who do that in government side, because this retirement solution problem is just big deal. And China's just open, everybody is going in everywhere in the world, more responsibility. on the individual for their own retirement. DC plans replace DB plans. There's a few exceptions. Even systems like NPS in Korea or in China, NCSCSF, they can't cover the whole retirement. It's just not doable. They can do a piece. So they have Pillar 1, which is the Social Security, then they have Pillar 2, which is like DC, and there's a whole array that will be needed to address this problem. These address everything except the very narrow pension issued by the government. Because if it's a pension issued by another entity, they need these bonds for the reasons that I've already given you, for the safe asset. This doesn't take away from taking risk. If 401k, you want to put half your money in equities, you still put half your money in equities. So this is not, and that's important. And I will tell you, I did give a speech at SEBA. You may not know what SEBA is. SEBA is the association of 115 largest pension and DC plans in the United States. And they all get together. They're kind of a associated group. And they were very interested. And why did I speak to them? Because if I'm going to get this done in the United States, I don't want them saying this is a bad idea. Because if they are, it's probably not going to happen. So if they understand it and understand it's not something that's taking away from them, but it would actually be good for them. Then so that's how you build these things. Enough on that, but you get the spirit of it. It's a lot of work. You know, if you have children, well, at least in my life, about 6 months is when I'd like to have them born. After, 6 months of pregnancy. But Mother Nature doesn't allow that. And for an elephant, it's 2.5 years. There are just things like this that take time. And there's no amount of AI or spiritual whatever that's going to move them faster. So if you're going to be in this kind of area doing innovation and trying to get big problems solved, you better be prepared for the long haul. And you have to do every piece. It's, yeah.
So maybe let's have like Scott one more question, and maybe we can take all the picture, and then each person can come and individually ask question. We'll have lunch together, right?
Lunch is it.
So analogous,
Quick question.
so analogous to the Affordable Care Act,
Yeah.
is there some critical mass of retirement, dollars that need to go into RSPs for this to have the economy of scale to succeed?
That's a very good question. Debt management people don't like to issue bonds that sell at a premium price. They sell at a low price, high yield, because it means it's more expensive than they're due to the government. So that obviously would be an issue. But beauty of putting it in the government bond market, and it's all the same, it's the same structure. You're just adding a new bond. You're not having to create a whole new system. Whereas if you were going to design some whole new system, you'd have to build the agencies, everything you talk about. So this is easy that's why Brazil was able to do it rather rapidly once they decided they wanted to do it. And that's why they made simplification, because they didn't have to build a structure. Does that make sense? Think about this. Anyway.
Thank you.
Okay.